Chapter 1. Tessa Valora Burke would always remember the words she heard on what was undoubtedly the worst night of her life. Though spoken only in whispers, they decimated what was left of her womanhood and dealt the final blow to her marriage. From that moment, she knew that the only way she could survive this devastation was to redefine herself in an unfamiliar body and learn to accept a future that was forever changed. It was her husband, Max, who'd insisted on this welcome back party following her latest cancer surgery. "I'm not quite ready to be around a lot of people," she'd said when he first suggested it. The truth was, she wasn't sure she would ever get used to the stares and awkward expressions of empathy she'd already endured on her first solo trip to the grocery store. Yet, she went along with his idea, even though she felt as though he was somehow parading her that night. After all, he gained a lot of publicity for his business through her breast cancer. It was bad enough that she didn't feel like partying. What was there to celebrate? This relentless disease had again taken more of her body, with no guarantee that it wouldn't be back for the rest of her. Between the dulling effects of the pain medication and the unexplainable sense of isolation, she felt strange. Who was Tessa Burke now? How would she navigate the rest of her life through this latest challenge? Those thoughts filled her head as she went through the motions of greeting people with forced graciousness and exhausting small talk, until she had to get away. She decided to find Max and tell him she was going upstairs to rest. The last time she'd seen him, he was headed toward the kitchen, so she started down the carpeted hallway toward the kitchen archway. The quiet in this part of the house soothed her nerves before the sound of murmuring voices drew her attention to the guest room at the end of the hall. The door was partially closed, but she glimpsed movement. Curious, she drew closer. "I just don't know what to do," she heard in a man's hushed voice. It was bad enough with the one breast. "Max?" Tessa steadied herself against the wall. "But I heard she had reconstruction," a female voice replied. "Yes, but it doesn't exactly match the other, and it's cold to the touch. I could live with that, but now this." Tessa peered through the narrow opening in the doorway. Max and his shapely blonde secretary, Kate Loring, were wrapped in each other's arms, confirming what she'd hoped against for weeks. While she'd been recovering at her father's apartment, Max's visits had been short and infrequent because the big business deal he was, quote, ironing out was apparently about 5'4" and had no wrinkles. As much as she tried to convince herself she was only being paranoid, the proof of Max's infidelity stabbed her with a pain that penetrated deeper than any cancer could. He sighed. "I mean, we went through the hair loss and weight gain, but after this last surgery, it's hard for me to look at her at all. I feel terrible, but what's next? I just don't know how much more I can take." The knife in Tessa's heart twisted. "Don't get me wrong, I feel awful for what's happened to her, and I've tried to accept all the changes, but I'm ashamed to say that it turns me off. I don't find her attractive anymore, and I just don't think I can live with that." All that was left of Tessa's hope and self-confidence began to ooze out of a new wound, and the choke that had been growing in her throat suddenly escaped. As Max and Kate turned, she spun and started back down the hall, not feeling her legs, but carried along on the certainty of what she was about to do. At first there was shocked silence behind her. Then, "Oh, God!" Max's voice reached her ears just as she rounded the corner and emerged back into the atmosphere of the party. She crossed the vast sunroom that was still filled with conversation and laughter, opened the sliding screen door, and stepped onto the double-tiered deck that overlooked the in-ground pool and gardens, where more guests strolled and mingled in the mild May evening. Everyone who was anyone was there, from prominent staff members and shareholders in Max's real estate corporation to politicians and business owners. Tessa was admired by all of them for her grace, poise, and exquisite flair for entertaining, but they'd been for the most part awkward and standoffish tonight, unsure of how this latest surgery had affected her and unable to imagine their own ability to handle it. They were acquaintances but not friends. Her real friends belonged to an exclusive club that required no money to join and consisted of no one who wanted to meet the qualifications. Maybe it was the effect of her first glass of wine tonight since the surgery, or maybe it was just time, but she was seized with a delicious sense of nothing to lose as she ran down the few steps to the lower deck where the DJ was entertaining with the mellow sounds of Nat King Cole's Unforgettable. "Let me borrow your microphone," she said, surprised at the calm in her voice. Before he could reply, she grabbed it and he killed the music. "Hello, everybody." As people paused and turned in her direction, she took a moment to get her breath. "On behalf of Max and myself, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight, and I hope you've enjoyed yourselves." She heard Max rip open the sliding door above. "Tessa," His voice had a panicked edge as he ran down the steps toward her, and the gathering fell silent. "It's okay, darling," Tessa continued. "I'll explain to our guests. You see, everyone, my husband has been subjected to unimaginable stress in living with a wife with metastatic breast cancer. As you might imagine, I've become somewhat disfigured over the years and, well, let's face it, less desirable." There it was, the outrageous truth, and saying it out loud brought her a giddy sense of freedom. There were a few gasps and light coughs as people began to fidget. "What are you doing, Tessa?" Max reached her and tried to wrestle the microphone from her hand. She pushed him away. "But not to worry, everyone." By now her voice was brittle. "I've just discovered that Max has all the support he needs, thanks to his efficient, and I might add, multitasking secretary, Kate." She turned with a trembling but satisfied smile and handed it to her red-faced husband. "Was there something you wanted to add, sweetheart?" As she headed to the upper deck, Max began. "Please forgive us. There's been a misunderstanding and my wife's been under tremendous strain." As his feeble, amplified apology and goodnight filled the air, the party inside the house also stopped, and everyone watched, mouths agape, as Tessa walked past. Now they have something to stare at, she thought, as she slowly climbed the ornately carved staircase, pretending she was in no hurry. When she reached the open upstairs hallway, she continued her slow, deliberate pace until she reached the master bedroom and went in, locking the door. Hunched over with sudden dry sobs, she made her way to the bed. Unfamiliar sounds escaped from deep in her chest as she lay down on the soft satin coverlet, drawing her knees up to her clenched stomach, her body shaking with a grief her mind couldn't define. She had struggled since the surgery to keep her true emotions in check, afraid of what would come out once they were triggered. But the humiliation of overhearing her already distant husband betraying her in intimate tones to another woman had robbed her of any strength she had left. She didn't know how much time had passed when she opened her eyes, but the faint window light had faded into darkness and the house was silent. She struggled to a sitting position and turned on the lamp beside the bed. "Tessa?" Oh, God, he was still there. "Go away, Max." "You caught me at a weak moment, honey, but it's not how it looks. Let me in and I'll explain." "You already have. I heard it all." "I had too much to drink tonight. I was babbling, and I don't even remember what I was saying." "You said what you really think." "No, I didn't." "I thought you didn't remember." He let out a frustrated sigh. "I know I haven't handled any of this the right way, and I haven't been there for you like I should. I've been a coward, but I promise I'll make it up to you." "How? Will you find me young and irresistible again?" "I can't change the past, but I want to start over." "Good idea. Why don't you start over at the condo?" "Come on, Tess, it's too late to drive to Toronto tonight." "Well, then I'm sure Kate can accommodate you at her place." "That's nothing with Kate, just a stupid fling. You know I love you, Tess." "How? By the way you avoid me? The way you can't look at me? I know I've changed, but you've changed too. I don't know you anymore, and after tonight, I don't think I want to." "Don't say that." He rattled the doorknob, and she could tell his patience had run out, as it often did these days. "Stop this and let me in, damn it." When Tessa didn't respond, he said softly, "I can't leave you like this. You shouldn't be alone." "I've been alone for a long time, Max. We both know it, so just get out." All right, I'll go, but only because you want me to and because I love you." His words sounded hollow. Now he was trying to appease her, and that hurt even more. "Go to hell, Max." There was a stunned pause before he struck the door. "You don't mean that." She'd never spoken to him that way, and she was glad the door was locked. She knew he would never be violent with her, but lately his mood seemed to shift without warning. Was it because he couldn't accept what had happened to her, or was it something else? At any rate, she didn't have the energy to deal with his relentless badgering. "I'll call you in the morning," he finally said. "We'll both get some rest and we'll talk." There's nothing more to talk about, she thought. She heard his footsteps fade along the hall and down the stairway, and listened until he drove away. As determined as she'd been to keep it from happening, he'd become a stranger. Did he have any idea how hard she tried to maintain a sense of normalcy between them while she was going through this hell? How many of her needs she'd put aside in an effort to save what relationship they had left? Instead, he'd been gradually distancing himself until tonight, when it was clear that he'd moved on and nothing was going to change that. And now that she didn't have to try anymore, she allowed herself to give in to the truth, that any hope of saving her marriage was gone. The digital clock on the bedstand read 11:33. Getting to 11:34 seemed all she could manage as she pushed off from the bed with her right hand and stood. She straightened and slowly walked to the full-length mirror where she gazed at the person looking back at her. How long would it take to get used to seeing what was missing? While it was covered in a fluttery sleeve, The absence of her left forearm and hand still shocked her, along with the constant shimmering sensation of a limb fallen asleep. Sharp phantom pain stabbed relentlessly through severed nerve endings that still detected every finger, her thumb, the heel of her hand, and random points along her arm, as real as if it was still there. At 44 years old, she used to think the extra weight and subtle changes in the shape and texture of her face provided enough trauma about her appearance, but she would gladly take on a couple more pounds or a new wrinkle to be whole again. Having one arm at the hospital hadn't been so bad. It was clearly the casualty of a necessary surgery, and anyway, everyone else there had something wrong with them, so she hadn't felt out of place. The 6 weeks she'd spent at her father's bright, cheery apartment being waited on, watched over, and loved had made her feel secure and given her a sense of the confidence she would need to return to her high-profile social life or just walk down the street as an amputee. Amputee? Wasn't that word reserved for accident victims and injured war veterans? Well, she was an injured veteran, only her war was a protracted battle with breast cancer. Sure, she dodged another bullet, as her father liked to say. The remainder of her arm was mending without complication, yet no amount of physical recuperation would restore what was now a stump that ended just above where her elbow had been, and no amount of emotional healing would return her to the Tessa she used to be, much less after tonight. Thank you for listening.